Welcome, everybody. Thank you, those joining us in the room here today. Thank you, everybody joining us out in the wonderful world of the internet. And mostly, thank you, Nick Mason. A pleasure and an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
So as they said, we're going to talk for a bit up here and then take questions from you guys here or whatever questions magically appear from the digital universe. So think what you might want to ask Nick in a bit. We're here on the occasion of the release last Friday of the Early Years box as depicted behind us. An impressive piece of furniture. This box set is. Do you want to take a shot at explaining the contents and parameters of this thing?
I'll take a shot at it. It really is an examination of everything we did from 1965, when we were really just starting out, through to 72, which was just before Dark Side, and it's not only all the music that we did in that period. It contains the films that we did soundtracks for, so there's both the Barbet Schroeder films, there's A Brisky Point, and there's also quite a lot of things that have, well, the best way of putting it is to say came out of the woodwork, which is things like American TV stations. There's one or two incredible, alarmingly embarrassing moments with us miming to, and miming so badly, I still can't quite get over it. And interviews with people like Dick Clark and Hans Keller, quite a famous one, where this guy was talking to Roger and just saying, "Why does it have to be so loud?"
So it's 27 discs in total? Is that the count? Something like that,
27
right?
discs in a box that, as we were talking earlier, you can actually use as a holiday home somewhere.
Open it up, roll the sleeping bag out, and just sort of move in there for a bit. So how involved were you in assembling all of this? I mean, is this something that you just kind of leave the freaks to go off and see what they can come up with, or are you really hands-on?
No, fairly hands-on, because I actually started trying to archive some of it, particularly movie video footage, I think about 10 years ago. But I did it in a fairly sort of rough and ready way. And in fact, I was helped enormously, because I eventually went down to talk to the people at Apple who were doing Beatles, sort of sifting through a lot of their stuff. And I saw how they were doing it and how efficiently they were doing it and how well they were doing it. And I thought, we really need to do this ourselves. And I went back to the others and said, look, I think this should be a band project. And so we'd started a long time ago trying to assemble some of this stuff. The music was fairly easy, because we always have had access to that and sort of tend to look after it ourselves, or the record company does. But in terms of the video and the film footage and so on, that was more complicated.
Where do you, I mean, if the premise is we're going to try to find everything, or at least everything that's worth, evaluating at all, where do you even begin to think about assembling that, or how to do it, or how to sift through it? Or, it's one thing if it's a focused, because you've done the immersion box sets around several of the albums themselves, but when you just say, for this whole period, anything we can find is fair game.
Well, basically, you attempt to get absolutely everything and then be a little bit selective about it. And really, you're looking to tell a story. So what you want to do is try and show the progress and take every step that you possibly can. And in some cases, show some of the ways we worked at things and some of the alternatives that we came up with. I mean, one of the things that I find quite interesting now is that there's a couple of performances of Atom Heart Mother before we put the orchestra on it. And it's surprising sometimes to hear things and go, well, it sort of stood up on its own anyway.
So you say it's, the idea is to tell a story. What was the story that emerged for you as this took shape?
Well, I suppose it's really probably the major part of a story would be to talk about or to show the transition, and perhaps also to celebrate Syd Barrett as well. I mean, when we did The Endless River, there was a slight sense that it was a way of celebrating Rick. But I think this is a really good way of maybe having a look at Syd and what he did and how important he was. And there are some tracks that we were working on with Syd when everything sort of collapsed, which they've probably been bootlegged before, but at least we've had the opportunity to go through them and improve the sound quality. And things like that, I think, are important.
How aware of, when you're doing this, how aware of the bootlegging community and culture are you when you do this? I mean, first of all, is it something that you pay attention to just anyway in terms of what's circulating out there, or is it just some other universe? And then do you feel like, certainly with the Beatles, there's this sense that there have been such incredibly detailed and well-done bootleg projects that they're kind of competing with the illegal stuff that's out there, and then the collectors are sort of like, well, this is fine, but it's not as good as what the Purple Check guys did with the reissues of this. Is that at all in mind?
Well, it's interesting, the bootleg thing, because actually quite a lot of this box is a pre-bootleg era. Bootlegging really, about the time, well, really post-Dark Side was when bootlegging really took off, because I think probably with the cassette recorder that could be taken in anywhere and so on. And I'm sort of thinking about, in this period, a lot of the live playing never was bootlegged, curiously, because it was just, people didn't have that technology.
It's remarkable that there's as much, the film part of this, that so much of that exists. This was not, you could shoot with a camera or a flip phone or whatever it was. Filming live performance was a serious production and effort. Were you surprised that there was this much? Plus, there was so much that was lost or erased, or networks that just wiped these tapes and reused them. Were you surprised that there was as much visual stuff left as there was?
Yes, I was. I think it's still disappointing that really Pink Floyd at Pompeii is the only really, really good example of something that shows exactly how we looked, how we sounded, and has the sort of character of the music combined in it. But there's some, I suppose the other thing to say about movie stuff is I'm surprised at how much work we actually got through in this period. It was a thing where in the same year that we released that we did release Dark Side, we actually also managed to make another album out of a film soundtrack at the same time.
Yeah, you sort of think of the films and the soundtracks and Zabriskie Point and all those kind of off to the side, but not when you're working on them. You're just working on the music one way or the other all through. Yeah,
that's right, absolutely.
What was the biggest surprise or revelation that you turned up out of this material?
Well, I think musically was finding the really original demos we made before we even signed a record deal. And we made these demos in a proper studio, sort of on a Saturday night when unofficially. And they have a sort of freshness which I really like. They were made as a sort of audition piece to try and get on a television program called Ready, Steady, Go, and also to enter the Melody Maker Beat contest, which was the big thing. We failed horribly on both counts, I'm afraid to say. Didn't get on television, didn't win the competition. And
yet, the recordings stand. I may have asked this in terms of telling the story, but a little different. As you were sort of connecting the dots and working back through all this, what did it show you? What did it reveal, or what did you learn about the band? To go back in this deep.
I think it was not so much learning, but relearning the transitions, the business of moving between the Syd Barrett era and Roger Waters' writing, and actually seeing how quite a lot of this material would then lead on to lead on to Dark Side and Beyond. I mean, there's quite an interesting example with one track that was developed for Zabriskie Point and never used, which actually then manifests itself on Dark Side as Us and Them.
So you can see seeds for stuff that came out later that's there.
Yeah, exactly that.
It's kind of the Duke Ellington thing of hearing something that somebody played in a solo and then taking a piece of that and building a whole other song out of that down the road. Are you a...
It's recycling,
Yes.
I think.
Before there was sampling, you know. Are you this kind of a fan? Because there's a lot of musicians, a lot of people who do these boxes, but then are sort of say, I would never sit and listen through, 10 takes of me working on this song. I'm not interested in listening that way. But are you a fan, are there people that you listen to that obsessively, or just are you sufficiently interested in process that does work for you?
Well, I think there's probably two things to say about that. The first is, at one time I'd have said, what's the point? I wouldn't be interested at all. But then realized that actually I did have every Charlie Parker record that was done with all the outtakes of Now's the Time or whatever it was.
All those crazy, the Benedetti tapes that are just the solos turned on and off, and yeah.
I mean, so the answer is yes, there's part of me. But there's also there's been an enormous sea change in the fact that 20 years ago, it was unthinkable that we'd put out anything other than the very final version. We went to some trouble not to let certain tapes out and try and keep things just in the vaults. And this realization that actually, if people would like to hear this stuff, then they should and would. And I would go, let's say Jimi Hendrix. I'd probably go buy the full box set with absolutely everything he'd ever done on it.
Certainly, there are plenty who do. So you have to tell us the story of, I don't know if it's the most notable piece in here, but the live soundtrack for the moon landing. Please tell that story.
Well, of course, the real problem with this is that I don't remember very much about it. And what I've got really good at is inventing stories now to cover those difficult points.
Who can challenge you?
But it was a brilliant idea, and I think it must have been a BBC producer who came up with it. And we were wheeled into the studio. It was all improvised. And I don't think we actually had sort of visuals to go with it at the time. We just knew what was happening and played along with whatever it was.
So you weren't watching
the
footage on the moon.
We never had sort of direct.
Just sort of, here's the idea.
No, just do it one more time.
It's brilliant from somebody to say, let's have Pink Floyd come in and do this. So just a couple things that go sort of through the box and then beyond. I mean, you are the one member of Pink Floyd who was there from album one through to the most recent. The only one who's been there, wire to wire for the band.
Yeah, tenacity is my middle name.
Perseverance is...
There's still a lot of doubt as to whether it meant I just could not get a job in any other band. Or
you keep showing up until they say not to. But you mentioned the transition from Sid to then David coming in and Roger, and then the post-Roger records of the more recent decades. What for you, what is the through line? I mean, what is, as the one who's been there, all the way through, what is it that you see as the consistent story or the ongoing approach that makes it Pink Floyd?
I'm not sure that I could even explain it because it's a journey, and you just keep going. I mean, in this sort of situation where you're looking at history, you start trying to piece it together, and you see some, as I say, you can see material that maybe comes up later. But while you're in there, all you're ever doing is pushing on, and what's the next album, and what can we do for the next show, and how can we develop the show beyond what we have now, and so on. Evaluating your own history seems really, really difficult.
Yeah, but it's the undertaking of a project like this. I mean, it's not, you've worked on the other reissue projects and other things that you've done. And is there a thing that sort of connects the dots from doing this where you think, Well, I guess that's sort of what we've been pursuing all along.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because the dots don't always necessarily connect in the order you think they do. And there's some, I mean, for me, I'm very fond of Atom Heart Mother, but it's one where the dots stop for a minute and sort of go round, and I see a sort of a stream from Piper to Saucer to Medal, really, and then on beyond that to Dark Side.
Just because we brought it up before we came on here, I'm curious to ask, because I've not asked you previously about the drumming. And for everything else that you talk here, there's probably not much opportunity to actually talk about the instrument that you play and the music that you yourself make. And being a drummer in Pink Floyd is a different gig than most rock and roll drummers. It's a different kind of playing and it's a different kind of music, you know, maybe more so the early stuff, but really all through. You know, did you come from a place where you're like, can't we just play some Chuck Berry songs and let me bash away a little bit? Or do you feel like, you know, why were you the right player for this band?
I just think right place, right time, more or less, and then developing with the other guys in the band. I mean, it's been a fabulous thing to do because it covers so many bases, and you don't really need to play Chuck Berry because there's plenty of other opportunities where we do play that sort of rhythm track. And it can be very lightweight and very almost avant-garde jazz, arrhythmic patterns or whatever. But then it can be a really good rock and roll thrash.
Do you see, you know, do you look at yourself within that community of those of Keith Moon and John Bonham and your contemporaries of bands that were sort of peers? Do you all see that, you know, everybody was doing a similar job, or do you think that you know, do you think there was something different in what your playing was than what those bands?
I mean, I was enormously privileged because you named these guys. They were absolutely my heroes, and Ginger Baker in particular, because I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for Ginger, because the first time I saw him playing with Cream was the moment when I thought, now that is what I'd like to do. But also Mitch Mitchell, who was a friend and really supportive, lovely guy. Keith Moon, one of the funniest and jolliest men I ever met. I mean, really privileged to have hung out with these guys. And of course, you learn so much from them, just watching, just listening. No, privileged.
And so do you think, you know, again, I'm trying to think through, you did the full remastering of the catalog and you did those immersion boxes around some of the big records, and now this. Are there still are there still frontiers to conquer? Are there still ideas in mind? Is there later live stuff or other things that you still can imagine going back into?
I mean, I think at some point we'll have a look and see if there's anything further on. And I mean, one of the things is with this material is that things are available now that wouldn't have been available 20 years ago. The technology that we were able to use in order to either repair or find better quality in things like video exists now and didn't exist 20 years ago. So it might be that one might find more things like that. I mean, really, the next thing that we'll do is we're planning an exhibition with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. They did a David Bowie exhibition a couple of years ago that was enormously successful and really interesting. I mean, I thought it was absolutely terrific. And I was thrilled when they asked whether we'd be interested in doing one. And I think there's an opportunity, again, of looking at history and how things were done, maybe even more, in an even more hands-on way.
Oh, that's great. That's because there's also the Stones exhibit that just opened here last night.
Oh, right. Okay. But I thought that was terrific as well.
Yeah, interesting to move to that kind of storytelling around this. So last thing I'll ask, and then we'll go to you guys. I'm curious. I have a 13-year-old son who's a big rock and roller and guitar player. And I think there's, you know, still certainly, you know, within big segments of the world, that sense that, you know, particularly teenage boys hit a certain age in a certain moment and discover Pink Floyd, that there is still this sense that it's a torch that gets passed at a
rite of
transitional
passage.
moment in life. Why do you think that those records still resonate? I mean, as much as the world has changed, as much as the culture has changed, there's something that clearly speaks to, you know, a kind of kid at a moment in time that doesn't seem like it's going to stop anytime.
Sadly, I just absolutely have no idea really why that works. I am extremely grateful for it, to have an audience. You know, when we started 50 years ago, rock and roll was entirely ephemeral. We were all worried about well, not that worried even, but we just assumed it was a year, 2 years, 3 years, and that would be it. And to have this longevity and to be of interest to a young audience is fantastic. And I have to say, I think the music industry at the moment is incredibly difficult for young players. But having said that, it's amazing how many young players there are and how good they are. You know, when I was a kid, if I'd gone to my music teacher and said, please, sir, I'd like to play the electric guitar or the drums, I mean, it'd been like Oliver Twist asking for more.
And now it's a basic in schools and a basic teaching industry.
Not only that, but all those guys who were in bands 20 years ago are now teaching kids.
All right, we've got we're time to take some questions from you guys. The microphone is here, so we'll go there.
Hey Nick, thank you for being here. What's the most surreal venue you've played in?
And that's not an easy question.
No, it's not an easy question. Well, I suppose the weirdest one in some ways was Venice, because it was actually on a floating barge off St. Mark's Square. And that was pretty strange, because the front row was not a mosh pit at all. It was a whole bunch of gondolas and gondoliers looking slightly hostile. But
perplexed, perhaps.
Where else? Probably Pompeii, in a way, was surreal, because it was it's very photogenic, but of course it was empty. There was no audience there. It was just this sort of rather windy and peculiar place. And I think that's one of the reasons why that piece of movie footage works so well, because there's atmosphere without it actually having the audience there.
Next up, down front.
Hi, Nick.
Hi.
Not to jump ahead, but will there be a second installment? And if so, will the wall shows, either the Nassau Coliseum or Earl's Court, see light of day?
Well, the problem, I mean, the answer is we haven't really got a plan for what comes next. As I said, we'll do the exhibition next and then see maybe if there's something to do. The problem with the wall shows is we did do some filming, but not the complete thing. I mean, Roger's now done a version of it, which I have to say I think is terrific. The video element of that is sensational. The big thing is whether one can, just how many versions of anything you can put out without people beginning to get a bit suspicious. And, if we have, we'll certainly review anything like that and see whether we think it's good enough and whether it's interesting enough.
But there isn't complete film from the wall dates?
No, because what happened was that when we originally started the wall film project, the idea was that it would be based on the live show, and that's why we actually booked Earl's Court and did that whole week of extra shows. But after a couple of days, I think, there was a sense, I think Roger particularly felt that it wasn't actually working. And that was when things were changed around, various people were moved around. Jerry Scarf was given a different position, and Alan Parker was brought in as a full-time director, whereas previously he'd just been an advisor, I guess. So we never really developed any of that footage.
Also in front.
Hi, Nick. Ed Lopez Reyes from Brain Damage. Just had a question about the momentary lapse of reason era. And what I was curious was, has there ever been talk about revisiting that album and adding your drum parts, for example? And as a follow-up question, the Atlanta shows that didn't come out from that tour as Delicate Sound of Thunder, will that ever be reconsidered for release?
The answer is we'll consider everything. And actually, the drum tracks were redone. I did actually do them, but we've never released them. I'd actually forgotten about that. Thank you for that.
Note to self.
yeah, absolutely. No, that's an interesting example of something we might look at. And I think the other thing that we've talked about a couple of times is the possibility of doing a remix on Animals, because I think that's the one album we think maybe technically could benefit from a revisit at the mixing desk.
And we can do one more over here.
I have a question about the version of Reaction in G that's included on the box set, Nick. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem to sound much like other known versions of Reaction in G. One in particular was on the BBC recordings that were bootlegged, and the broadcaster calls them Reaction in G. So my question is it known that that instrumental on the Stockholm live set is in fact Reaction in G? And my related question is, does the studio version exist?
That's a very good question, to which I really have almost no answer at all, except to say that
I'm sure that you learned long ago the fans know far more than you do.
yeah. Where were you when we were doing the sleeve notes? I don't know. I'd have to... the way we used some of these titles was a little loose, I think. There's things like Nick's Boogie, which turns up in various different forms at odd occasions, and then it becomes Roger's Boogie. Fairly typical, I'm afraid. Do you know what? I actually can't answer the question, but I might have a listen to it. I'm sure that we didn't record it as a studio piece. It was the sort of Nick's Boogie, Reaction in G, were things that were sort of just given out as a title for pieces that had just been done for one specific live moment.
Thanks.
Everybody, thank you so much. You've done a great job of giving Nick Mason some homework to do after this show. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Nick Mason.
Thank you.
Pink Floyd, Early Years is out now.
Thank you very much.